Alcohol, proof that humanity's greatest invention is also its dumbest experiment. Every generation rediscovers the same truth. Pour enough liquid confidence into a person, and they'll challenge gravity, fire, or the police in a dance-off. History isn't written by the victors. It's written by the hungover survivors who said, "Hold my beer," and somehow lived to regret it. And trust me, we've only just started spilling. 1. In 1845, a man in London decided he was immune to fire after 3 glorious pints of scientific courage. He strutted into a pub, declared himself the fireproof king of Soho, and attempted to demonstrate by lighting his own coat on fire. The crowd applauded until they realized he wasn't joking. The man survived, barely, and local newspapers turned his drunken disaster into a moral warning about alcohol. Of course, the moral most people took away was, maybe I should try that when I'm drunk. And just like that, the world's first public service announcement about booze turned into an accidental dare. 2. Ancient Greece, birthplace of democracy, philosophy, and the phrase, "Let's mix wine with water so we don't die." The Greeks loved drinking, but they also feared anyone who drank it straight. To them, pure wine was basically rocket fuel for chaos. Plato wrote that men under 30 shouldn't even touch alcohol, and if they did, it should be heavily watered down. Naturally, his students ignored him. One legendary symposium ended with philosophers arguing over whether they could outthink gravity by lying perfectly still. They couldn't. It's comforting to know even the fathers of Western thought had to be dragged home by their sandals. 3. In 1913, an Irish farmer tried to prove that his horse could drive better than he could when drunk. After a long day of testing the product, he climbed into his cart, handed the reins to his horse, and shouted, "You're the designated driver, Murphy." The horse obediently trotted straight into a river. The man survived, the horse swam to shore, and the local court fined him for reckless reliance on livestock. It became one of the earliest drunk driving convictions for a man who technically wasn't driving. Somewhere out there, his descendants are still arguing that the horse failed the sobriety test. 4. Medieval monks brewed some of the strongest beer in Europe, then invented Lent as a loophole to keep drinking it. See, they were forbidden from eating solid food during fasting periods, but nobody said anything about liquid bread. So they made beer so thick and heavy it could practically hold a spoon upright. They called it liquid sustenance, but let's be honest, it was just holy alcoholism with branding. Some of them got so hammered, they forgot which saint they were praying to. To this day, historians argue whether it was spiritual devotion or just an early form of meal prepping for drunk people. 5. During Prohibition, doctors were legally allowed to prescribe whiskey for medical use. The catch? Every symptom mysteriously became treatable with whiskey. Sore throat? Whiskey. Anxiety? Whiskey. Existential dread from living in the 1920s? Double whiskey. Pharmacies turned into disguised bars, and one doctor in Chicago reportedly wrote over 12,000 whiskey prescriptions in a single year. Lawmakers eventually caught on, but by then, the entire country had already developed chronic whiskey deficiency. It's the only time in history when you could walk into a Walgreens and come out with a buzz instead of a Band-Aid. 6. In 1809, a British naval officer decided to celebrate his promotion by getting drunk and ordering a 21-cannon salute indoors. His ship was docked, his crew was plastered, and the captain, apparently channeling the spirit of chaos, thought firing live ammunition below deck was the right move. The cannons obliterated the officer's own quarters, sank the ship, and created a paperwork nightmare for the Royal Navy. When questioned, he allegedly told the court-martial, "It seemed festive at the time. History doesn't record his punishment, but I like to imagine it involved a lifetime ban from party planning." 7. In 1967, a man in Nebraska got drunk and decided to rob a bank. Noble ambition, terrible execution. He walked in, announced the heist, then politely handed the teller his driver's license as proof of identity. He left with $600 and his full legal name printed on the police report before he even made it home. When officers arrived, he was sitting on his couch drinking the stolen money, literally. He'd mixed the cash into a blender with beer, so they couldn't use it as evidence. Turns out you can't launder money with Budweiser. 8. One of the weirdest drinking rituals comes from 18th century Russia, where nobles believed drinking champagne out of a woman's shoe brought good luck. Apparently, someone saw a dancer lose a heel during a party and decided the obvious next step was to fill it with alcohol. From then on, wealthy men competed to see who could drink from the fanciest footwear. One count even installed a tiny silver tap on his mistress's boot for convenience. It's the most expensive way in history to ruin both your dignity and your shoes simultaneously. 9. In 1956, a Florida man decided to prove that beer could fuel cars. And like all great innovators, he started with zero mechanical knowledge and maximum confidence. He poured 2 six-packs into his gas tank, yelled, "To the moon!" and promptly set his Chevy on fire. The local newspaper called it a bold experiment in combustion and stupidity. To his credit, he wasn't entirely wrong. The car did move about 6 feet before exploding. Technically, beer is flammable. It's just not great mileage unless your goal is to travel from your driveway to the afterlife. 10. In ancient China, they had an entire job, called the drink police. Their sole purpose was to monitor officials during banquets and make sure nobody got too drunk to govern the empire. The irony? The drink police themselves were usually plastered by the halfway point. Records describe entire banquets degenerating into slurred karaoke, philosophical debates about rice wine, and officials attempting to arrest themselves. Somewhere in there, foreign policy was discussed. It's nice to know that even 2,000 years ago, bureaucracy and alcohol made the same tragic duet. 11. In 1985, a man in Wisconsin invented what he called the ultimate beer helmet. It was a modified football helmet with 2 cans on top, connected by plastic tubing. His pitch to investors: hands-free drinking for America's future. He never got rich, but he did make it onto Late Night with David Letterman, right before falling off the stage because, surprise, he was drunk. Years later, frat houses and tailgates across the country turned his failed invention into a national symbol of proud stupidity. Somewhere, that man is still explaining to his grandkids that he changed history, just not in the way he meant to. 12. During the Prohibition era, desperate Americans turned to something called bathtub gin. Spoiler: it was not made in factories, but in literal bathtubs, using ingredients that would terrify a chemistry teacher. Paint thinner, wood alcohol, and perfume were all on the menu. The result? Blindness, brain damage, and a national hangover that lasted 13 years. When Prohibition finally ended, people celebrated by throwing massive drinking parties, because nothing says, "We've learned our lesson," like toasting the end of your own bad decisions with the same stuff that almost killed you. 13. The ancient Egyptians believed that beer was a divine gift from the gods, which sounds nice until you realize they also paid workers in beer. The pyramid builders were reportedly given 4 pints a day as part of their wages. That's right, the greatest architectural marvel on Earth was constructed by a workforce that was permanently buzzed, which explains a lot about the uneven blocks and mysterious passageways. Archaeologists like to say the pyramids align with the stars. Personally, I think they align with the nearest brewery. 14. In 1994, an Australian man was arrested for breaking into a bar, not to steal money, but to mop the floor. He told police he didn't want the place to look messy. Turns out, he had a key to the bar's back door from a previous job and decided, while drunk, to do some unsolicited janitorial work. The owner dropped the charges out of sheer confusion, saying he's the first burglar who left the place cleaner than he found it. Proof that not all alcohol-fueled crimes are evil, some are just weirdly productive. 15. One of the earliest recorded alcohol bans was in ancient Babylon, where priests declared that anyone caught watering down, beer would be drowned in that same beer. Talk about poetic justice. It was their way of ensuring quality control, a sort of ancient Yelp review system where the feedback was fatal. Imagine today's bar scene if bartenders faced the same rule. Half the world's mixologists would vanish overnight, and happy hour would turn into last hour. 16. In 1972, the U.S. Navy banned alcohol aboard submarines after one too many incidents of tactical intoxication. Apparently, when your job involves nuclear weapons, it's not ideal to be tipsy. The final straw came when a crew got drunk on homemade moonshine distilled from antifreeze and fruit juice, which sounds less like a drink and more like a chemical weapon. After that, Naval Command decided sobriety was a better defense strategy. Still, you have to admire the determination. Trapped underwater in a metal tube, they somehow found a way to brew beer out of despair and radiator fluid. 17. In 1920s Paris, artists decided absinthe wasn't just a drink, it was a lifestyle. They believed the Green Fairy opened portals of creativity, which in practice meant drunk painters arguing with furniture. Picasso, Hemingway, and Van Gogh all swore by it. though Van Gogh may have taken things a bit too literally when he cut out the middleman and removed his own ear. Absinthe was eventually banned because people kept confusing hallucinations with inspiration. Turns out, the line between genius and madness is exactly one shot of wormwood away. 18. In 1969, the city of Cleveland attempted to host the world's largest beer festival. It went about as well as you'd expect from a place known for setting its river on fire. Organizers planned for 10,000 attendees. 30,000 showed up. By sunset, every beer tap was dry, people were drinking straight from kegs, and one man tried to tap a fire hydrant because it looks thirsty. The city banned large-scale beer events for a decade afterward, not because of violence, but because cleanup crews refused to work in the nation's first alcoholic mudslide. 19. In 1932, an English farmer trained his dog to fetch him beer from the pub. The dog carried a basket with coins in its mouth, delivered it to the bartender, and returned with 2 bottles. It was a wholesome system, until one day the dog came back empty and hammered. Apparently, locals had decided the good boy earned one on the house. By the end of the week, the dog had a bar tab and a hangover. It's still the only case in British history where the designated driver was also the drunkest in town. 20. During the California Gold Rush, miners drank whiskey so harsh it could be used to clean engine parts. It was homemade, unregulated, and often contained gunpowder or turpentine for extra kick. One miner wrote in his diary that it tasted like getting punched by God. It's amazing they found any gold at all, considering half of them were probably seeing double. Yet somehow they still managed to create an economy, build towns, and start bar fights that lasted 3 generations. America, where innovation and liver failure walk hand in hand. 21. In 1983, a man in Sweden stole a train while drunk and drove it into a building. When questioned by police, he calmly explained that he was taking it for a test drive and that it cornered beautifully. The authorities didn't agree, but train enthusiasts did. They actually built a fan club for him online decades later. It's the only known case where someone achieved cult hero status for confusing public transport with Mario Kart. 22. Colonial America wasn't exactly sober either. In fact, the average colonist consumed about 7 gallons of alcohol per year. That's nearly a pint a day. Breakfast beer? Normal. Workday rum? Mandatory. Church wine? Bring your own flask. Even children drank diluted cider because water wasn't always safe. When the American Revolution started, soldiers were partially paid in whiskey. Freedom, it seems, was declared under the influence. The Boston Tea Party could have just as easily been the Boston Hangover. 23. In 2010, a group of monks in Belgium accidentally created one of the strongest beers in the world. They meant to make a mild 6% ale, but misread their yeast measurements and produced something closer to industrial paint thinner. Rather than dump it, they sold it under the name Absolution. The beer became a cult favorite, especially among people who wanted to feel closer to God via concussion. Proof that divine mistakes can still turn a profit. 24. In 1875, Dublin experienced what historians now call the Great Whiskey Flood. A massive distillery fire burst a 26,000-gallon vat of whiskey, sending a flaming river of booze through the streets. Locals rushed out with pots, pans, and even boots to scoop up the free liquor. 13 people died, not from burns, but from alcohol poisoning. Imagine explaining that to St. Peter. How did you die? Heroically drowning in a wave of whiskey. It's possibly the most Irish sentence ever spoken. 25. In 1977, a man in Oklahoma tried to prove to his friends that tequila makes you invincible. His test? Wrestling a cactus. Witnesses said he screamed, "I am the desert," before diving headfirst into a patch of prickly pear. He emerged looking like a porcupine in crisis, covered in 200 spines and exactly 0 wisdom. When paramedics asked what he learned, he reportedly replied, "Cactus 1, me 0, but I'd do it again." Somewhere, Darwin was slow clapping. 26. The Vikings believed that dying with a drink in hand guaranteed entry into Valhalla, which sounds heroic until you realize they applied that logic to every situation. Some warriors were buried with barrels of ale, others drowned in their own mead halls trying to fast-track their admission. Archaeologists have found ceremonial cups, carved from enemies' skulls, because apparently nothing says cheers like poor impulse control and boneware. If heaven had bouncers, they were probably exhausted. 27. In 1998, a man in New Zealand got drunk and tried to sell his entire country on eBay. He listed New Zealand with a starting bid of 1 cent and a description that read, "Great views, decent sheep, slightly used." The auction site removed the listing after 6 hours, but not before 7 people placed real bids. The government issued a statement clarifying that legally, the nation was not for sale, though privately a few politicians admitted the offer seemed fair. 28. The town of Lynchburg, Tennessee is home to the Jack Daniel's distillery. Ironically, it's also located in a dry county, meaning it's illegal to buy the whiskey made there. You can tour the facility, smell the barrels, even see the founder's old office, but if you try to sip, you're breaking the law. The only legal drink available is a commemorative bottle that comes empty. Nothing says Southern hospitality like selling souvenirs that symbolize government-approved thirst. 29. In 1842, a man named James Boozy Jim McGregor attempted to open what he called the world's first 24-hour pub in Scotland. It lasted 9 days before collapsing, literally. The building tilted after his drunk patrons decided to install a dance floor made entirely of empty kegs. When the structure fell, locals rushed in to salvage the alcohol, calling it Scotland's most successful architectural failure. The government later banned 24-hour pubs, proving that sometimes the only thing more unstable than liquor is optimism. 30. In 2009, an Irish town ran out of alcohol and declared a state of emergency. A freak snowstorm trapped delivery trucks outside the city limits, cutting off beer and whiskey supplies for St. Patrick's weekend. Pubs went dry within 48 hours, leading to what the local paper called mass sobering. People reportedly began rationing Guinness like it was wartime coffee, and one man tried to brew beer in his bathtub using bread, raisins, and toothpaste. Officials called it a dark time, which is ironic for a nation famous for loving dark beer. 31. In 1916, a Russian chemist invented a new formula for vodka, so pure it could be used in engines. The Tsar was so impressed, he ordered barrels of it to be distributed to the army. Soldiers, being soldiers, drank it instead. Within days, Russia had the most hydrated military and the least effective one. It's no wonder the revolution started soon after. Nothing destabilizes an empire faster than an army that's too drunk to march. 32. In 1995, a man in Texas walked into a bar, ordered a drink, and accidentally robbed the place. He set a $20 bill on the counter and said, "Give me all your money," meaning to joke with his buddy. The bartender, terrified, handed over $300. The man tried to return it, but was arrested for armed robbery anyway, because in his drunken brilliance, he was holding a pool cue like a rifle. The judge dismissed the charges but fined him for stupidity. Honestly, fair. 33. In 1539, the King of Sweden, Gustav Vasa, banned his soldiers from drinking before battle. The next morning, half his army didn't show up, because they were still in the tavern arguing with the bartender about whose round it was. Furious, the king reinstated alcohol but renamed it courage juice, so it sounded patriotic. It worked too well. His troops marched into battle singing drinking songs and accidentally conquered the wrong village. Sweden called it a strategic success. The villagers called it Tuesday. 34. In 1954, a man in Kentucky built what he claimed was the first alcohol-powered lawnmower. His innovation? It ran on beer. And so did he. Police found him mowing his lawn at midnight, wearing sunglasses and yelling, "Efficiency, boys!" The mower had no engine. He just attached a gas can full of Budweiser. His neighbors described it as the loudest meditation session ever held. The patent office rejected his invention, but local legend immortalized him as the man who finally combined two of America's most sacred traditions, beer and yard work. 35. The Mongol Empire practically ran on fermented mare's milk, a drink called kumis. Genghis Khan's warriors believed it gave them strength, courage, and better aim, which is ironic because every surviving record says their aim was terrible. Historians think most of their victories came from the enemy running away out of confusion. Picture thousands of horsemen reeking of sour dairy, charging full speed while hiccuping through battle cries. That's not strategy, that's lactose-fueled terror. 36. In 1978, a group of frat brothers at the University of Kansas built a homemade beer pipeline from their dorm to a nearby bar. It worked perfectly for 2 days before someone noticed college students were suddenly too happy and too hydrated. When police found the pipe, they couldn't stop laughing long enough to write the report. The bar owner called it the most impressive act of theft ever committed by plumbing. The school expelled the masterminds, but the pipeline legend still circulates, mostly at alumni reunions, right after the third round. 37. During World War II, British intelligence developed a plan to disguise bombs as bottles of wine and sneak them into Nazi supply chains. The idea was abandoned after one officer got drunk and taste-tested the prototypes. The explosion leveled half the testing site, and the only thing salvaged was the world's most polite obituary. He died doing what he loved, being curious and very, very British. 38. In 2016, police in Canada pulled over a man riding a Zamboni down the street at 3 a.m. He was wearing hockey skates, holding a beer, and yelling, "Just smoothing life's rough." Patches. He told officers he was training for the Winter Olympics in inner peace. The machine was returned to the rink, the man to his couch, and the story to every Canadian bar for the next decade. It remains the country's most wholesome crime. 39. In 1788, Australian settlers threw the continent's first recorded party to celebrate the arrival of their rum supply. Within 24 hours, they drank it all, declared martial law, and accidentally burned down half their camp. The governor described it as a spirited demonstration of colonial enthusiasm. It was later nicknamed the Rum Rebellion. Though rebellion is generous, it was really just the sound of an empire discovering hangovers in a new hemisphere. 40. In 2011, a man in Germany broke a world record by opening 400 beer bottles in 1 minute using only his teeth. He was immediately hospitalized. When asked if it was worth it, he grinned, with the 6 teeth he had left, and said, "Absolutely." The record still stands, mostly because nobody else is dumb enough to try. Somewhere, a dentist hangs that story on his wall as both marketing and a warning label. 41. In 1937, an inventor in Chicago tried to create smokeless whiskey by turning bourbon into an aerosol you could inhale. He called it the future of drinking. Within 5 minutes of his public demo, everyone in the room was coughing, dizzy, and slightly on fire. The inventor claimed it was a small setback in the pursuit of convenience. The government called it a biological weapon. To this day, his patent remains one of the most hilariously rejected ideas in the history of alcohol and lungs. 42. In 2004, a Russian village ran out of vodka during a snowstorm and decided to distill their own using antifreeze and sugar. They named it Winter Spirit. It was neither. 17 people went blind, one guy claimed he could see the future, and local authorities finally declared the village dry. Ironically, the ban only made the homebrew industry boom, because nothing says resilience like surviving a homemade chemical attack and asking for a refill. 43. In 1871, Mark Twain visited a Nevada saloon, where locals were serving a drink called 40-Rod Lightning. It was named after the distance a man could walk before collapsing. Twain took one sip, declared it the closest mankind has ever come to drinking an earthquake, and wrote a story about it. The bartender proudly used the quote in his ads for years. Twain's review remains the only time in history someone accidentally created marketing copy while blacking out. 44. In 1988, Japan introduced beer for kids, a non-alcoholic drink with foam, served in miniature mugs so children could toast like adults. It was marketed as educational fun. Predictably, parents complained when toddlers started demanding cold ones at dinner. The company rebranded it as Happy Froth and added vitamins, because nothing builds character like starting your first fake hangover before kindergarten. 45. During the Prohibition era, American bootleggers got so clever they disguised speakeasies as businesses called funeral parlors. Customers entered through the coffin room and bartenders served gin behind fake caskets. It worked until one drunk mourner actually tried to climb into a coffin and sleep it off. The police found him snoring during a raid. The newspapers called it the Dead Drunk Incident, proving again that American journalism was at its peak when everyone involved was tipsy. 46. In 1991, a man in Mexico tried to smuggle 500 bottles of tequila across the U.S. border by disguising them as holy water. When customs officers opened one and took a sniff, he crossed himself and said, "It's for baptisms." He wasn't lying. Baptisms in lime and salt. The judge sentenced him to community service, ironically in a church kitchen, where he reportedly made the best margaritas the clergy had ever tasted. 47. In 1890, an Irish priest tried to cure alcoholism by inventing a beer that made people instantly sober. Instead, he created something that made them twice as drunk and mildly radioactive. Locals nicknamed it St. O'Malley's Miracle and drank it in defiance of logic. The church quietly banned it, fearing unholy side effects, but not before it inspired a local legend, the priest who turned beer into more beer. 48. In 2007, a man in Norway broke into a brewery after hours, got drunk, and decided to swim in a fermentation tank. He survived, but the beer didn't. The batch was ruined, and the company lost thousands. When police asked him why, he said, "It looked inviting." The brewery later named their next release the Naked Diver in his honor, because if you're going to destroy 1,000 gallons of beer, you might as well become the mascot. And there you have it, proof that alcohol doesn't just lower inhibitions, it lowers history's IQ. From kings with keg problems to monks who invented drunk fasting, humanity's relationship with booze is basically one long slurred apology. So, which of these deserves a toast or a timeout? Drop your favorite disaster in the comments. And remember, drink responsibly because evolution clearly doesn't.